Okay. We're live. Super. All right. So welcome everyone to AMA number 42. This one is our Let's Get Technical RSM edition. It is September the 22nd, 8:30 p.m. UTC. So firstly, introduce Art Brock, co-founder and CTO of Holo and Holochain. Art. All right. And I'm David Atkinson, the commercial director. I know everyone gets very excited, Art, when you're on the AMAs, so it should be fun. Before we jump in, some thank yous and announcements. So firstly, thank you to all of our community testers and community developers, especially those of you who have been helping support us with RSM testing, etc., and especially for some of you who have been contributing to code. So a big shout out and thank you to all the community devs, community hosts, and all of you who have been offering your support and being involved in the ecosystem as things really start to ramp up. If you'd like to get more involved, visit the forum, forum.holochain.org, and just start chatting to people, get involved with the ecosystem, participate in an event. You can go to holo.host/events for the latest events. But let's just jump straight into this. Okay, so just to set a little bit of context, so this is a technical AMA where Art is going to talk about RSM and answer all of your questions. I know there's a sort of equal weighting between technical questions and timelines and roadmaps. There's a series of updates over the next month, and we'll have a timeline and roadmap AMA for the next AMA. This one is the technical AMA, right? So last week we launched RSM. So Art, what does Holochain RSM stand for? And just also for some context, what is actually Holochain Redux?
Cool. Well, RSM stands for Refactored State Model, and we're not going to keep calling it this. We just need a way of talking about the new version of Holochain that's built in Rust versus the old version of Holochain that's built in Rust. So we're differentiating them by essentially their state model. The previous version of Holochain used a Redux style model. And when I say that, I mean Redux is a state management system framework that's written in JavaScript and frequently used with React on the front end. And since Holochain has to do a lot of tracking of state management, the lead developer of that version of Holochain thought it would be useful to use a state management framework like Redux. And borrow from some of those principles so that state changes would only happen when a reducer called and reduced the state, and you could have an atomic state change and all of those kinds of things. But the challenge with that approach was that the sort of Redux state tree layer was kind of an overlay, and there was still the underlying database layer that the actual cryptographic data of Holochain was being stored. And it made it be that there were almost like these two different layers that developers had to think about, and it made it harder for developers to see and focus on the integrity of the underlying layer when what their code is managing is the overlay layer. And it just made our code base more complex than it needed to be, and it actually led to some data integrity challenges in the underlying layer because of the two different layers and it being hard to keep your focus on the state of the lower layer. And so really, this version of Holochain is basically saying that one got a bit too complicated. We're simplifying and streamlining and keeping the focus only on the Holochain cryptographic state.
Cool. Okay, thank you. So what big changes are there that will make Holochain RSM so much better than Holochain Redux?
I mean, the main thing is that everything's gotten simpler, faster, and cleaner. That means it's more performant. We actually have some better concurrency. We don't have, certain things blocking other things, and creating kind of locks on the system like that. So it means that in real use, things tend to be quite faster. Also, though, there have been a lot of improvements because when we started building that version 2 years ago, both Rust and WASM were pretty immature, and we've come a long way in the maturity of those tools, as well as the maturity of our developers, who were all pretty new to Rust and WASM at that time as well. And so we're benefiting both from the simplification of the architecture, but also from the improvement of the tools and our devs that have happened in the meantime.
Cool, thank you. What are some of the primary ways Holochain RSM is easier for devs to comprehend?
So when I was looking at this question, I wasn't sure which type of dev they were talking about. So there's two kinds of devs, right? There's core devs, people who are contributing to Holochain's core code, and there's app devs who are building apps on Holochain. So I'm going to talk about both. For core devs, I mean, we basically have already said it. By not having another state layer, it simplifies everything. The code base is simpler. It's a lot easier to find things in the code. It's more modular. It's clearer what modules are responsible for in terms of which of Holochain's subsystems. So we've already been getting feedback from people who have submitted a couple patches and bug fixes that this is way easier to figure out what is going on. So it's easier for our core devs. It's easier for people to contribute to and figure out what's going on. So that's one advantage. And as far as the app devs go, for building on Holochain, fundamentally, not much has changed about the way you build apps on Holochain. I mean, the fundamental concepts and principles and patterns are the same. However, the HDK commands have gotten streamlined a little bit, and you need a little bit less boilerplate. You need to include less modules and things in your app when you build it. The feedback we're getting from developers right now is that they're able to kind of rebuild what they had before in about 1/3 the code, 1/3 the number of lines of code. So it is a little cleaner as well for app devs, even though the fundamental patterns haven't changed much. We have renamed some of the functions for greater consistency, and the main thing is that, like, when you used to do a database get, you would get back an entry, and now you get back an entry and header pair, which means you get the like the timestamp and the author and all the kind of stuff of whoever created the entry at the same time you're getting the entry. And I think it's even possible that that's where some of the streamlining is coming, is that you had to do 2 requests before, and for things that you can now get in 1 request. And so there's a few things that are simplified and streamlined, but the basic principles are still the same.
Cool. Thank you. Nice to see you so vibrant and excited as well.
I'm really happy that this version is out there. It's kind of sucked to be working on it kind of in secret. We didn't want to draw a lot of attention to it. We felt like we had announced once before a version of Holochain before we should have, and we should have let people keep building on the old version, and we didn't want to discourage people's use. But now it's nice to have it out there. And yeah, I think that the team is happy to be getting more feedback from the community, more engagement from the community. So yeah.
Super. Okay, so will a slimmed down version of RSM run in a web browser? Can web browser users have a chain and an identity?
So we do plan to build a browser-based light client in the future, but that's not really what Holochain RSM is. RSM does help us get a little bit closer because we've actually streamlined a bunch of dependencies from our Rust libraries, and we have a code base that we think can more readily compile to WebAssembly. But I'm sure when we actually try to tackle the problem of building the light client, we're going to run into another set of challenges that we haven't had to confront yet. So I want to make it clear we're not biting off that piece of work right now in Holochain RSM. Right now, we just need Holochain peers as a standalone application to actually be doing what Holochain's supposed to do, to have the kind of speed and performance and data integrity that we need out of Holochain. Holo, is a little bit of a bridge for this, where you don't have to run this in your browser. You basically have a peer hosting network available to you that can run a chain for you. And so it still lets web users become users of Holochain apps if it's a Holo hosted app. So we already have, an approach or solution for that. As far as can you end up just having a chain and identity in a browser, one of the problems with that is that browsers suck as places to truly keep data long term. Because what happens when you reinstall your browser? What happens when, do you know that you're losing all of your data? Do you know that you're losing your identity at that time? Most people treat browsers as a window into servers. So there's a whole other responsibility that comes if we actually just let these things run in a browser. But there are people who package Holochain apps in Electron, which has a web browser and web server all built in. And in that kind of scenario, the person knows they've installed a separate app and they're not just treating it like their web browser, and they'd have to remove that from their system and that kind of thing. So that is already it is already an option with the previous version of Holochain, and will be an option as well with the RSM version of Holochain if you want to distribute your app that way.
Cool, thank you. So are there any plans to build out tooling such as ETH Remix? And for those who don't know, Remix is an open source tool that allows you to write Solidity contracts straight from a browser, or EOS Studio, which is an easy to use environment for app development within the Holochain ecosystem.
Yeah, totally. Actually, Philip, who's going to be joining the call here a little bit later, has been working on some of our tools, our graphic. Oh, here's Philip. He's waving hello. He's going to be talking about RSM from a developer perspective, because he's been building on it. And part of what he's been building on it is, in fact, our GUI tools for this. So we're going to have this CRISPR tool for slicing, splicing, and building Holochain DNAs. It also generates backend code and UI components. And you can see the prior version of CRISPR Chimera that runs on Holochain Redux. If you want to go check that out, just search Holochain CRISPR. This is CRISPR like the DNA editing thing, CRISPR. Yeah, that's it. And there's a couple of instructional videos there on that version, but we do expect in the next few weeks to be rolling out the RSM version of this as well, which actually goes a little bit further than the prior version, because it actually does some version control management and has these behavior that will generate back-end code as well as front-end code. And Philip's, I think, gotten a little carried away and also added like Kanban boards and knowledge base and chats and all this kind of stuff to the front-end tool, so that the front-end tool itself becomes an example of running Holochain apps as well as building Holochain apps. So it's pretty cool.
Super. Okay, so is Holochain using the new IETF Quick, which is HTTP 3?
Sort of. There's a little bit of confusion, I think, in this question, in that Quick came from Google as a UDP-based transfer standard that predates HTTP3, but the new HTTP3 standard is using Quick. So the new web standard that's being created out there actually is using Quick, as it's integrating that into it as a standard communication protocol. And that is the Quick that we're also using for our peer-to-peer gossip and communication. Main difference being, HTTP3 is focused on web browser, web server communication. So it's basically server client. It has a bunch of server client or client server specifications for coordination, and ours is peer-to-peer that we just use for establishing connections to have peers gossip and coordinate.
Thank you. TCP/IP suite protocol relies on trusting blindly certain parties. For example, say assignment of IP. The HTTPS protocol assumes a client-server architecture that leads to centralization. So how will these problems be bypassed?
Yeah, so Holochain is sort of way out there on the peer-to-peer decentralized spectrum in that you can declare your own address in a Holochain app. Basically, by generating a key pair, public-private key pair, your public key becomes your address. So you don't need an IP address or anything like that in the address space of a Holochain app. That said, when you publish your address to the space and join the network, there may be a validation step where they say, do you have an invitation code, or have you done your proof of work or stake or something, or so apps may be completely open, or they may be fairly tightly closed by invitation only, but your ability to create an address is totally your own. There's no authority there except for the ED 25519 curve for generating elliptic key pairs, right? But Holochain is not dependent on any one particular transport. So the whole idea here is that in the peer gossip tables, in the peer routing tables, you declare the addresses that you can be reached on. So when we talk about Holochain using Quick, that's what we're doing on top of IP addresses for UDP or TCP/IP, type of users. But you can declare addresses that are IPv4 or IPv6 or Bluetooth or mesh networking protocols. So the architecture of Holochain is not bound to the transport layer. It can use any transport layer. So back to the question being asked, that pretty much bypasses any of those centralization issues. You choose your transport.
Cool. Okay. So now when it comes to going fully peer-to-peer, all the nodes need to do is publish their own public IP, or if they don't have one, choose a relay proxy they trust. So how will that trusted relay proxy be chosen?
So first, let me give a little bit of context on this question, because the first part of the question is in quotes from the article that I wrote about kind of unpacking Holochain, like looking at the new version of Holochain under the hood. And we're talking about how the old version of Holochain had this SIM2H sort of central switchboard that we were using for debugging a bunch of our networking protocols and gossip and detecting inconsistency between parts of the system and such. The new version of Holochain doesn't have that kind of central switchboard. What it's really using are these sort of tunneling connections through proxies or relays. And so that means there's an end-to-end encrypted connection via Quick. So Quick uses TLS certificates to encrypt the connection end-to-end. And the problem is that some nodes, it's hard to establish a connection with because they're behind a NAT or a firewall. So they need to, when they publish in the peer routing tables, when they publish their address, they can publish a relay that does have a public address that they can be reached through. And then they reach out to that relay, establish a connection, and then others can contact that relay. That relay can tunnel connections between them. So the question that's being asked here is, how can nodes choose their relays? How can you choose which relays you trust when we go full peer-to-peer? Because we're starting off, again, for debugging purposes with a central relay, so we can actually troubleshoot whatever issues may be showing up in gossip and watch traffic patterns and that kind of stuff. Because once we decentralize that, we better have those problems already fixed, right? So there actually isn't a user interface for this yet. But the basic idea is that there's going to be a list of relays, like a relay file, on your system that we might initially populate with some of our, bootstrap servers or relay servers that we might provide as a public service, but that over time, users could replace that list or add their own things to the list, and that you sort of do some periodic randomized selection from that list. That's the general gist of how it works. If you want to take our servers out of that list, that's fine. We don't need to relay your traffic, but we don't have a UI for this yet.
Well, thank you. So will this version of Holochain have layers of abstraction between the underlying implementation and DHT storage and DNA logic?
So it sounds like this question's coming from somebody who's sort of talking about that Redux layer, the overlay that we were talking about that kind of created that layer of abstraction. And so I do want to clarify, the new version, Holochain RSM, is using LMDB right now, the Lightning Memory Map database, which is a fast, lightweight database. It's using LMDB for storage. And there are a few layers of database abstraction and some Rust data types, data structures between the structures that the DNA use in your app code and the actual LMDB key value store. But these abstractions are primarily there to actually make it easier for you to use LMDB so that you can iterate through records or do some queries or use some of the prefixing on keys, that kind of thing. But they don't fundamentally change the nature of the state model in the way that that Redux kind of overlay does. It's just really about extending some features to access the key value store more conveniently.
Okay, so another question starting with a quote here. We also guarantee that if multiple processes are attempting to write to the source chain, only the one to finish first will succeed, requiring the others to retry their validation on top of the newly updated local state. So does this retrying process happen automatically, or is it up to the caller to retry?
Again, that's quoting from that article. And currently, if the source chain head has moved since the process that has called in started, basically, when you call in to Holochain on a Zome function, when you call into your application, we bookmark where was the source chain when you started this process, right? And if the source chain has moved by the time you try to commit any changes, then we basically give you back the state has changed, retry error. And so that is at the moment up to the caller to have to then recall, to send a request again and try again. We are considering some feature enhancements in the future where you could specify whether a call should retry automatically, but we can't assume that case, because in many cases, the caller may actually need to know about the moved head, because it may actually need to change the data. It may actually need to restructure its content before it tries again. So we really have to, right now, we have to assume that we have to return this to the caller. Because, for example, if you were doing a HoloFuel transaction, and in the content of the transaction, you have a reference to the top of chain of each of the people. And if that chain moved for one person, well, the two people have to sign a new transaction with a new reference to the new top of the chain, right? So you actually have to change the data in the transaction itself and try again. At the moment, we default to giving an error and letting the caller try again.
All right, thank you very much. So how will multi-threading concurrent state modification / locking work?
So the previous example we just described there is an example of where concurrency is a danger, right? Because the linear state of your source chain may have changed. You may move, and we need that to be a linear progression of state. In other words, there is a fixed order in which things must occur on a local source chain. So actions for which those concurrent state changes could produce a conflict, like the one we just talked about, automatically enforce a singleton update phase, right? So that's when we check everything. So that the concurrency goes away during the actual state change. There's a singleton that you have to go through, and it checks to make sure that there's not a conflict that is being introduced. So it can actually reject those changes or make them retry. However, there's a whole bunch of parts of Holochain state that are inherently compatible with concurrency. So for example, updating your DHT shard, that data is already being concurrently simultaneously created from peers out there anyway. So we have to have the Holochain process of receiving those signals, be able to receive them in unexpected orders, and like we have no idea what order we're going to receive those things in. Now, any particular one of those things may have a dependency as a validation dependency where it has to go check and make sure that something else exists or that something happened before this, but that will happen in the validation process. But as far as like integrating it into the Holochain state, we have to have that be resilient to receiving or processing the data in any order, in unexpected order, because that's fundamentally a requirement of Byzantine fault tolerant systems anyway, is that you need to be resilient to messages that are lost or misordered and that kind of thing. And so that part of the system is very resilient to kind of the multi-threading and concurrent changes, because that's what it's built for.
So can signals be broadcast to a subset or selection of clients? And this is useful for user presence systems over web sockets in brackets.
Right. Currently, the Kitsune underlying peer-to-peer library that we're doing, kind of like IPFS has its lib P2P library. We also have now our own kind of P2P library that we're sharing. That doesn't specifically do what this person's asking for. So can it be broadcast to a selection of clients? Not exactly. What you can do is specify a target for a message, or you can specify a target neighborhood, meaning the nodes whose address are close to this hash, right? But then the network is going to select those nodes that are close. You can't specify a set of addresses that are like scattered around the whole DHT. So you can either specify a single target or a multi-target in a neighborhood. Otherwise, if what you're trying to do is send to a selection of users, you're going to actually have to send a separate message to each one.
Super. Will RSM counter DDoS churn?
Right. So this is a question about distributor decentralized denial of service attacks. And first of all, just Holochain in general, even the old version of Holochain, the old version of Holochain, which was only running on Sim2H, would have Sim2H as a potential attack point. But Holochain in general is pretty hard to attack with DDoS, because what would you attack? You know, if you have a whole bunch of bots, you have 10,000 bots, and you're doing this decentralized attack, are you going to attack 10,000 nodes? You're just going to have like one-to-one kind of traffic levels or something like that, which probably that's not much of an attack. Where DDoS is a danger is when you take lots of network bots and target them at centralized parts of infrastructure. And since Holochain doesn't really have any centralized parts of infrastructure, there's no place to attack in the first place. So if you focus your attack on a node or a few nodes, then yes, those guys might have a degrade in service. They might have problems, but all the rest of that Holochain app would be functioning fine. Nobody would really even notice that those nodes are having problems, because Holochain is made to function where nodes can fall offline and drop offline and whatever, and it would just keep functioning. So there's nothing special about RSM that changes that, except for that we don't have SIM2H. But it is possible that they're also thinking about the Holo hosting infrastructure. And the Holo hosting infrastructure does have some points of kind of centralization, because where we have to be able to service web requests, we have to do things like resolve domain names and redirect those to hosts. And that resolution process and the servers that direct those things to the peer host, the hosts on the peer hosting network, you could look at those as centralized places to attack. But we are hosting those things on Cloudflare service workers, which means Cloudflare's got, a couple hundred data centers all over the world that they run on these things on, hundreds of servers in each place. So we're talking about these things are already running across thousands of servers in hundreds of data centers, and they're being run by the company that provides the best protection against DDoS attacks. So Cloudflare provides their own defenses against attacks on their service workers, and they're one of the best DDoS defense companies out there. So yeah, neither Holochain nor Holo are particularly effective targets for DDoS attacks.
So would another major refactor permanently break apps built on Holochain RSM?
Well, we don't have any other major refactors planned, but even RSM, the way that it is right now, we are not saying that the API is fully stable. We definitely expect to be putting out some breaking changes that may change some data structures or some of the API commands, but the fixes to apps should be pretty easy, and we will always be having those things be specified. Breaking changes will be specified in our change logs as we go.
Thanks, Art. So we had another question around what does RSM mean for app developers? And I think if you go back and watch this, that we've already answered that in the third question Art picked up there. We also have some words from the emerging Holochain ecosystem developers about RSM that we wanted to share with you all.
It works like it should be. It's making applications that real users can use. That's like, we are approaching that. That's the biggest step I think we've had in Holochain history for that. So I'm really, really, really excited for that.
There's a lot here, and to be honest, I'm still processing it. There's definitely the bits about it being orders of magnitude faster. There's definitely bits about, the ability to define each function as private or public, capability tokens becoming more native. For the first time, we're talking about Holochain first, which means an app can also change its local state even without being online. And I think that's really cool. I think that is like getting closer and closer to what agent centricity really is. So yeah, those bits are very exciting to me.
Transactional, autonomous transaction, and having your own view within the function call. Yeah, I think that's the fact that it's just much more performant, because I've heard from a few people that like the slowness could be a blocker, but it's yeah, that's really exciting, really, really exciting.
Kind of resonate with the same things other people said. Atomic transactions at a function level, zone level, awesome. That's caching that's been introduced, awesome. We're actually looking forward to the performance enhancements. So that's really great. Just looking forward to using it. And the protocol QUI that also is exciting.
There are lots of features such as atomic transactions and unmet dependencies for validations that make it a total game changer. But mostly I'm excited for core team as a team of engineers who were able to first write the prototype in Golang, then write Holochain in Rust. And now with all the experience and ideas and community feedback and real examples of applications, they have made a different architecture using all the knowledge. So as an engineer, I know that every time you rewrite something from scratch, you do it much better. So it's really cool to have it being rewritten according to all the feedback.
Very nice. Thank you very much, guys, for sharing. I think now we wanted to welcome one of the devs into this AMA. Phil, how are you going? Good to have you here.
That'd be me, right? Yeah. How are you going?
Great, thank you. So Phil, you've developed on Redux. In fact, I remember first met you when you and Art were coding. What were you coding originally? Were you guys working on Go together?
Yeah, and we were doing personas, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, very early edition of personas and profiles.
Yep. Okay. So So you've also developed on Redux. And now you've built CRISPR using RSM for over a month. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between RSM and Redux?
Yeah, I think one of the best things is this Holochain thing just got a whole lot more fun. There's so much less code now. Like when I rebuilt CRISPR from the Redux version to the RSM version, I decided, right, I'm just going to ignore everybody else, get out of my own way, and just build something for me that I could use to build Holo apps, really like beautiful, fast, tested, supportable Holo apps, and just see what happened. And at the same time, you know, I knew about the RSM version and I'd heard about the changes and stuff in it. So I decided, well, I'm just going to build this without any Holochain at all and build a really agent-centric app, because the thing of agent centricity, it's about the person. So you don't need to be connected to anybody. So I built this whole thing and then started working with David and Tom on the RSM version of how to build some of these things for Holo. And it was remarkable how much less code there was. Like, it was ridiculous. Like Arthur said before, about a third of the code. Oh, I'm not kidding. I reckon there's a third of the code. And when you're pairing with, or when I've been pairing with Tom and David, like I think Lily mentioned it, like you can feel that these guys know exactly what's going on now. That Rust, you should pair with them and just watch their Rust. It's just nuts, right? Does my head in, but it's beautiful, right? And then to have rewritten it again, like the WASM things are so fast, right? In Holochain before, it was tolerable how slow it was to compile and test, right? Tolerable. Now it's so quick, like you just literally press the, okay, test it again. I actually have it on a file watch and it just runs tests all the time now because it doesn't take up heaps and heaps of processing power. So that is super cool. And the WASM is heaps better now. You can actually store things in Holochain. Like previously, if you hinted at storing like a base64 image, you would just crash because it's too big to go across the WASM boundary. But now I think it's 16 megs is the limit, which is a good size limit, which means you can store things as avatars and all kinds of like little bits and pieces that make sense to store as in Holochain, super fast. And because of the 16 meg limit, you can actually bring back a list of them before you crash, right? So that's really cool. I think the thing that I've really enjoyed the most about this lately is that because Holochain doesn't have entry redirects at the moment, like in the Redux version, you could go, here's a hash key, get me this entry. And even though that entry had been deleted 6 years ago and there was 5 million other updates on top of it, you would get that latest entry. the RSM version hasn't got that yet. And I'm not actually looking forward to using it. I'm probably not going to use it, because now that I get really what's going on, which is Holochain, even though it's on LMDB and there is little databases in it, it's not a database. Think about an entry as it's being version controlled. Holochain is this data integrity fabric for basically version controlling entries. And then when I thought about that, I realized it would be really simple to build a version control system on Holochain. So by the way, I've been in lockdown since March and haven't left my house apart from booze and food for 7 months, right? So, excuse the beard. Yeah, so then I thought, I'll just go build a version control system, which I did, and that was like really cool. So I've been using that, and the CRISPR version of Redux, I tried to do everything for everybody. Right? You could just design a piece of like a data thing, and magically I knew all the code that went with it. Right? Worked for very, targeted use cases, but in this version, I decided, well, that's not really how I work, right? And I'm really gone with this whole philosophy of get out of my own way and you ain't gonna need it, right? So if I haven't needed exactly that thing, it doesn't exist in the code I've written down, right? And until I need it, and then when I need it, I just can't build it, right? So it's really fun. So if you think about the way that we all, I know pretty much every developer does this, right? You go, oh, I've got an idea and I know how I want to do it, but I can't quite remember the exact syntax of this 17 millionth language that I've learned. So I've got to go and check it out on Stack Overflow. And you find it and you go, yeah, that's the exact, it's not kind of, okay, some of it does what I want. What is going on here? And you read all the comments and it's like, and it takes time. And you have to know exactly what you're doing to pick the right pieces of code to go massage to fit into your app. And I thought, what if I didn't have to do that anymore? What if the thing that I build stops me ever having to do the same thing again twice? So this whole thing that I'm building is the idea that I can build something, refactor it to be reusable back into my own tool so that when I'm using my tooling, it comes back again. So this is CRISPR, which is a gene editing tool, with the whole idea of repeating. That's what the R stands for on the end, is repeat. I've actually built this tool that's building this tool that I'm using to build the tool as I'm building the tool that I'm building. It's kind of like, it's really fun. And the RSM stuff is just, it's brilliant. Like, it's so fast. I can literally write a test, press the button, and it just tests. It doesn't take 6 minutes, I think it was taking me before, to run some tests and stuff. Now it's just like instant. And what else did I write in my notes? Yes, of course. You can update an entry as many times as you like now. Go for it. It actually works. You don't get stuck in that loop. But the best thing is this new path thing. So I think one of the things that Arthur and I were working on when you first met you, David, was anchors. That's what it was, wasn't it?
Yep.
So now anchors is now RSM'd. So anchors are multi-level paths now, and they're so powerful, right? Because with this really small piece of entry, you can now make really powerful ways of mapping your data. So you may not be able to do SQL searches and stuff like you can on a centralized database, but using the pathing system cleverly, you can provide all sorts of really interesting ways to get to your information. And yep, that's me. Oh, actually, no, one more thing. Previously, when you're doing multi-agent testing, and I have it set up on my laptop to have like 7 or 8 agents all working at once with all these automated tests and just like beating the crap out of Holochain, you'd always get these weird errors and just like, what is going on here? And I'm pretty sure that was because like in the RSM version now, you have this idea of a commit where multiple changes are made and they're committed as one commit. Whereas on the Redux version, things are just all happening, right? So then you would get these weird situations where Bob's updated something that Alice was working on before Alice thought that Bob had done it. And like, And you can never work that stuff out because you've seen the log. But now that doesn't appear to be happening for me, which is awesome. Do I sound excited enough? Because it's fucking awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Philip.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks so much, Philip. So I know we're not going to do a demo of CRISPR today, but I think we should let me know when it's ready to properly to demo, and we can put one or have you on an ecosystem session and go through it and demo it and get this enthusiasm coming through again.
Yeah, I'd love to, because it's so close now. I've built I've used the elemental chat repo that's in the Holo thing as the DNA for a messenger app that I built, public messaging, and I've also built a sticky notes app and personas and profiles and this Kanban thing and code editors, and it's just nuts. It's been really fun. I really would like to go outside.
Yeah, when we get the questions around like what apps, give me an example of an app that runs on Holochain or whatever. When you get new people into the ecosystem, we can just in 6 months we'll just be pointing them to the 700 apps that you've built yourself.
That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to build it. See if you can beat me at it. I challenge you. Mastership.
I'm really looking forward to being able to have that tool at hackathons and bootstrap people much more quickly into the process without them trying to figure out how to make front ends, talk to back ends, and like all that kind of stuff. Let them have a template that just brings them all the way up to speed. I think that's going to be fun. When we ever get to do hackathons again someday, post-COVID days.
Yeah, we'll have to do some remote hacking, I think.
That's it for us today. Art or Phil, is there anything you want to share or finish with before I wrap up?
I will have a very awesome demo. Well, not even a demo. I'm just going to show you how I work with my tooling soon.
I think I do just want to say that even though I did say this in the article, it was like lower down at the bottom of the article maybe or something, but just about this is a rollout that's happening in phases. Like we haven't brought the crates public yet, and things are going to get a little easier to use when we bring the crates public, but first we need to resolve some namespace conflicts between the old version of Holochain and the new version and stuff like that. And then we're still updating some of our developer documentation, and Paul Doust and some others are, and actually a bunch of people from the community are jumping in and helping with that as well, who've already started using the new version of Holochain. So do expect to see this getting easier over the next weeks. We should, by the time we get Philip's stuff out as well, the GUI, IDE, rapid dev tools, we should have all those other things lined up. So we should have documentation, the public crates and usability of that system, as well as the GUI tools all kind of coming out over these next weeks.
So I think then the final thing to end with is just huge thank yous. There's been a few public thank yous of the Mary, Art, and others have shared, but I think the core team that's just had their heads down wherever they've been in the world and whatever's been going on over the last 9 months, building out RSM has been a monumental effort. And also I think like just to, as well, the sort of organizational maturity and everyone working together, getting behind it. I think Art obviously just done an amazing job over this year and getting us here. So huge thank you to you as well. And Phil, for the crazy stuff that you continue to build. And it really has been and continues to be a massive team effort. And I think like the pieces are lining up just the team have been working on Holo hosting and Holo Fuel and getting all of the other hosted hApps all running and really building out the ecosystem, and in Bear and Carolyn and building out the community, well, the ecosystem. There's been and the people contributing to core code. The guys you've seen on the video have just, that's just, you see a snippet there, but that's been many hours of their lives that's committed to building applications, and also really a way of life in investigating agent centricity and participating in the ecosystem. So just a huge thank you to everybody involved. Thank you for you guys watching, and there's a lot more to come. So this was AMA number 42, the 22nd of September. Thank you very much, Art, for joining, and thank you very much, Phil, for joining. For those of you who are now super motivated and inspired, please visit the forum. Would be a great place, forum.holochain.org, or our websites holo.host or holochain.org, and start to get involved, and look forward to seeing you all on an AMA shortly.